Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian is not simply a novel about violence in the American West. It is an unflinching meditation on existence, morality, and the terrifying possibility that war is not an aberration of humanity, but its truest expression. To write about it is to walk into a desert of philosophy and myth, where the boundary between beauty and horror vanishes, where Judge Holden the bald, towering philosopher-warrior becomes both prophet and monster. The line, "If war is God, what does that make us?" is not just a rhetorical flourish. It is the central paradox of McCarthy's vision. If war is divine, if conflict itself is the animating principle of the universe, then humanity is not its victim, but its priesthood, those who enact its rituals in blood and dust. What follows is both a retelling of the story and an exploration of its themes. I'll take you through the entire arc of the novel, scene by scene, and then pull you deeper into the judge's philosophy. War as ontology, violence as truth, beauty intertwined with horror. I want to write in a way that someone who has never opened the book could understand it, feel its weight, and glimpse why readers call it one of the most violent, yet most profound works in American literature. This is going to be long, 5,000 words long, because Blood Meridian demands expansiveness. It is not a novel you can summarize in neat terms. It resists neatness, just as war resists reason. It's a howl in the desert, and I'll try to bring you into that howl. The novel begins with a boy, known simply as the Kid. He is 14, motherless, and raised by a drunk father who tells him he'll live to see men die like dogs. He flees Tennessee with little more than a knife and an instinct for violence. Already, McCarthy places us in a biblical register. This is not just a boy, but an archetype, a vessel for violence itself. The language is sparse and biblical, echoing the King James Bible. It is less like reading a story and more like listening to scripture whispered by someone who has lost their faith, but retained its rhythm. The kid wanders across the southern frontier, drifting through barrooms and battlefields, stabbing a man in a tavern, drifting into Texas where the land is more violent than any city. He joins a ragged band of filibusters, American adventurers seeking to invade Mexico for glory and loot. They are led by Captain White, a buffoonish figure who imagines imperial dreams of American expansion, but who is quickly slaughtered in Mexico. McCarthy delights in undercutting the hubris of men who believe they control history. Their invasion collapses, their bodies left mutilated by Comanche warriors in one of the novel's most infamous scenes. The description is apocalyptic. Comanches ride painted horses, their bodies adorned with feathers and animal skins, their charge a vision of chaos and primal destruction. McCarthy does not romanticize them as noble savages. He presents them as avatars of violence itself, proof that war belongs to no single race or nation, but to the human condition. Blood is the universal language. The kid survives, barely, and drifts into Chihuahua, where he encounters the figure who will dominate the rest of the novel, Judge Holden. The judge is vast, hairless, seemingly ageless. He is a Renaissance man of the desert, capable of sketching flora and fauna with delicate precision one moment and orchestrating slaughter the next. He speaks multiple languages, plays the fiddle, lectures on geology, astronomy, and law. But beneath all of this knowledge lies his central creed. War is the truest order of the world. To the judge, war is not merely an act humans commit. It is the very fabric of being. War is God, he proclaims. It is not metaphor but ontology. War is the principle that defines existence, the only arena where meaning is made. Peace, in his view, is an illusion, a pause between conflicts. Beauty, art, knowledge, all of these are ultimately in service to war. The judge joins with John Joel Glanton, a historical figure who leads a gang of scalp hunters employed by the Mexican government to collect Apache scalps for bounty. But soon they slaughter indiscriminately Apaches, Mexicans, peaceful villages because violence is more profitable and more exhilarating than restraint. They move across the desert as a band of marauders, leaving behind burned churches, massacred families, rivers running red. McCarthy does not shy away from describing atrocity. His prose is hypnotic, blending the grandeur of epic poetry with the starkness of report. He describes babies impaled on lances, women raped, old men butchered, priests slain at altars. And yet, in the same breath, he describes the desert sunsets, the strange beauty of the landscape, the way violence and beauty intertwine inseparably. This is one of the novel's most disturbing features. You cannot look away, because horror is narrated in the same cadence as beauty. McCarthy refuses to let us divide them. To read Blood Meridian is to feel awe and disgust simultaneously. The kid, for most of the novel, is less an active protagonist than a witness. He participates in violence, but not with the zeal of others. He kills, yes, but often with reluctance. This small trace of conscience sets him apart from the judge, who recognizes in the kid both a potential disciple and a dangerous dissenter. The judge does not tolerate dissent. His philosophy requires absolute submission. If war is God, then all must serve without question. To resist is heresy. Throughout the novel, the judge and the kid orbit one another in a kind of theological duel. The judge, ever eloquent, delivers monologues about the nature of existence. The kid, often silent, resists not with arguments, but with a stubborn refusal to bow entirely. In this tension, McCarthy dramatizes the human dilemma. Are we merely vessels of war, or can we resist? The Glanton gang's atrocities accumulate. They become hunted themselves, by Apaches, by Mexicans, by the very governments that once employed them. Their numbers dwindle, men killed in ambushes, drownings, in fighting. McCarthy depicts their downfall not as justice, but as inevitability. Violence consumes itself. In one of the novel's most surreal episodes, the gang rides into a desert wasteland where the landscape becomes dreamlike, filled with volcanic rock, desolation, and visions of hell. It is as if the earth itself has become a participant in their damnation. The judge, however, remains untouched. He is invulnerable, immortal in his enormity. He seems less like a man than an elemental force. The climax comes years later when the kid, now grown into the man, wanders again and encounters the judge in a saloon. Their final meeting is one of the most enigmatic and disturbing in American literature. The judge embraces him, then enters the outhouse where the kid has gone. What happens inside is never described explicitly. The suggestion is that the judge kills him, perhaps rapes him, perhaps annihilates him spiritually. The ambiguity is deliberate. McCarthy leaves us only with the judge returning to the saloon, dancing naked, half-conscious, or driven by greed suddenly fall silent when he takes the floor. He becomes a kind of oracle, and his speeches drip with metaphysical certainty. At one point, he declares, "War is the truest form of divination. It is the testing of one's will, and the will of another within that larger will which, because it binds them, is therefore forced into making a choice." Here the judge presents violence not as chaos, but as order. War is, in his mind, the universal adjudicator, the only way truth reveals itself. In peace, men can lie, deceive, or pretend to be equal. In war, the veil is lifted. One man lives, another dies, and the fact of that outcome is beyond dispute. The battlefield is a courtroom where God presides, and the verdict is written in blood. This idea echoes Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan. Hobbes wrote that in the state of nature before government life is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Humans, in Hobbes' view, are fundamentally driven by fear and desire for power, leading to endless conflict. The judge seems to agree, but takes it further. Hobbes saw government as the way out of this cycle, while the judge denies the possibility of escape. For him, government itself is another form of war, another tool of power. Treaties, laws, civilizations, they are pauses in the eternal rhythm of battle, not its resolution. The judge strips Hobbes of hope and leaves only the abyss. There are also shades of Nietzsche in his rhetoric. Nietzsche's concept of the will to power, the drive underlying all human action, resonates in the judge's philosophy. But where Nietzsche celebrated the will to power as a source of creativity, art, and self-overcoming, the judge reduces it entirely to domination and destruction. He has no interest in the individual artist who creates beauty. He is the artist of war itself, the orchestrator of massacre. In one sense, he is Nietzschean. In another, he is the inversion of Nietzsche, taking the will to power and purifying it into something inhumanly singular: the will to war. McCarthy even evokes Heraclitus, the ancient philosopher who said, "War is the father of all things." Heraclitus believed conflict was not merely destructive but generative. Strife was the principle by which the cosmos achieved balance. The judge embodies this line but twists it. He revels not in balance but in excess, in the idea that war consumes without end. His laughter in the saloon at the end, his dancing, his proclamation of immortality, all of it is an eternal hymn to conflict as the only truth. Perhaps most chilling is how much the judge echoes Schopenhauer. Schopenhauer saw the world as driven by an irrational will, blind and insatiable. Life is suffering, desire breeds endless dissatisfaction, and the only relief comes in rare moments of aesthetic contemplation or ascetic renunciation. The judge seems to agree about the blindness of will, but he rejects Schopenhauer's escapes. For him, art and knowledge exist only as tools of domination. He sketches flora and fauna, not to preserve beauty, but to own it. He destroys the specimens afterward, ensuring that the thing exists only in his ledger. He plays the fiddle not for beauty, but for power over his audience. Knowledge, in his view, is meaningless unless it is bent toward control. Where Schopenhauer offered art as solace, the judge offered art as conquest. This inversion of philosophy is why he terrifies readers. He takes ideas that resonate with truth and drains them of mercy. He is a philosopher without pity, and pity, McCarthy seems to suggest, is the only fragile thing that makes us human. Part of what makes the novel so hypnotic is its prose. McCarthy writes in a biblical cadence, eschewing quotation marks, avoiding modern punctuation, filling the page with long, rolling sentences that mimic scripture. But it is scripture of the desert, scripture soaked in blood. When he describes landscapes, he uses the language of eternity. Mountains like the backs of gods, sunsets the color of blood, deserts stretching like the floor of the sea. He reaches for the cosmic even in describing dust. This is why the violence does not read like a news report. It reads like prophecy. The massacres are narrated in the same tone as the creation of the world. And that, perhaps, is McCarthy's most daring move. He denies us the ability to separate the sacred from the profane. If war is God, then the Bible is also a war chronicle. The historical background deepens this effect. John Joel Glanton was real. His gang of scalp hunters did ride the Mexican frontier in the 1840s. They were paid for Apache scalps, but they turned quickly to indiscriminate butchery because Mexican scalps and even innocent villagers' hair could be passed off for bounty. The judge, however, is not a documented historical figure. McCarthy inserts him like a phantom into the history, a mythological presence who amplifies what was already horrific into something metaphysical. This blending of fact and myth forces us to confront the question: how much of history itself is mythologized violence? We often sanitize it, reducing massacres into dates and treaties. McCarthy refuses. He plunges us into the gore and then sets a daimonic philosopher in the middle of it, daring us to call it what it is. One of the novel's most powerful and disturbing qualities is the way it fuses horror with beauty. Again and again, McCarthy describes scenes of atrocity alongside scenes of wonder. After a massacre, the survivors stagger through a desert where the rocks glow like embers in the setting sun. After a child is murdered, the night sky blooms with stars described as the order of the world written in fire. It is impossible to separate the two. The effect is not gratuitous. It is ontological. McCarthy is showing us that the universe does not distinguish between beauty and horror. To the cosmos, a sunset and a massacre are both part of its unfolding. It is humans who crave separation, who want beauty without blood. But the judge insists, They coexist because they are one. This is why so many readers describe the book as both unbearable and unforgettable. You want to turn away, but the prose is too beautiful to abandon. You find yourself entranced by sentences that describe horrors you wish you had not imagined. That tension is the very heart of McCarthy's art. The ending crystallizes everything. When the kid, now the man, meets the judge again, it is as though time has folded back on itself. The judge has not aged. He is as eternal as war itself. The kid has grown, hardened, but also softened in one way. He retains some kernel of conscience. Earlier, he showed mercy to a young Apache boy, refusing to kill him even when the gang urged him to. This mercy marks him as different. It is why the judge cannot let him live. The judge tells him, "You're not the sort that has forego the company of others. But it ain't for lack of company. It's because you're a holdout, you alone." That word holdout is crucial. In a world where everyone else bows to war, the kid resists, however feebly. And for that, he must be destroyed. What exactly happens in the outhouse is left shrouded. Critics have debated it endlessly. Some argue it is murder, others that it is sexual violation, others that it is a symbolic annihilation beyond physical terms. But the result is the same. The kid is erased, and the judge emerges proclaiming, "He will never die." The ambiguity forces the reader to confront the metaphysical truth. The judge is not just a man but a principle. As long as humans exist, as long as war exists, the judge will dance. But does the kid's resistance mean nothing? Here lies the faint flicker of hope, or at least of meaning. The judge erases him, yes, but McCarthy preserves him in the text. We remember the kid. We remember that he showed mercy. We remember that he stood apart, however briefly. In literature, memory is resistance. The judge cannot annihilate memory, and so McCarthy offers us not salvation but witness. The novel itself becomes a testimony that there was a holdout, and that matters even if it matters only in the act of remembering. To return to the question, if war is God, what does that make us? McCarthy forces us to confront at least three answers. First, we are its priests, carrying out its rituals in blood. Second, we are its victims, consumed in its endless cycle. And third, we are its witnesses, capable perhaps uniquely of resisting through memory, pity, or art. The kid embodies that third possibility, even if it is crushed. McCarthy offers no utopia, no peace. But he does offer testimony. Reading Blood Meridian is like standing at the edge of a void and listening to it speak back. It is terrifying because it does not flatter us. It does not tell us we are good or that the world is just. It tells us we are killers, that our history is written in scalp bounties and massacres, that the deserts of the West were baptized in blood. And yet, in telling us this, McCarthy gives us a strange, bleak kind of gift: clarity. To see the world without illusions is, perhaps, the first step toward any genuine resistance. The judge may dance forever, but the act of reading him, of remembering him, of feeling horror at him, is itself a kind of defiance. That is why the novel endures. Not because it is pleasant, but because it is true in the darkest way. McCarthy wrote a scripture of violence, and in it he left us both a warning and a mirror. If war is God, then we are its worshippers. But in remembering the kid, we might also be something else. The ones who refuse to kneel, the ones who carry pity like a secret fire through the desert night.